Hi everyone, thanks for jumping on for a quick roundup of the things that are happening. East Asia Pacific today, we've covered 30 odd issues plus an assessment, and it's the real Anzac week. We did Australia yesterday and New Zealand today. Basically the same issue. Society doesn't like to be told what to do, and politicians don't know how to make decisions. As a result, New Zealand's had big demonstrations in their capital city in Wellington, and so they've called the war room together in New Zealand as if this is a massive challenge, like the perils are coming in from the north. And what they haven't been able to do is to go, okay, naughty people, we're going to arrest you if you don't go home. So they're not giving the police the power, they're empowering the demonstrators. And if you empower people that have no interest in public health and safety, then they'll continue to be empowered. If it continues to escalate, and if you continue to procrastinate like Ardern is doing and like the Morrison government is doing, ultimately you end up with a situation like America did, where it ends up on Capitol Hill and it ends up a fiasco, and people start to play with it politically. And of course, now both New Zealand and Australian opposition are starting to utilise in Australia, the Chinese relationships, and now in New Zealand, the ability to control demonstrators when they just need to go and get a damn vaccination. It's such that 3% of the bad eggs are going to make Ardern look pretty silly, and she's allowing them to. So that's pretty boring in EAP in terms of that. Obviously, Thailand's continuing to have a little bit of a mess in Parliament, but I'm sure our assessment that will release tomorrow afternoon to our members will explain the longer term vision of where pro-Yut and Thailand is heading. Of course, most people will have their nose buried in their own thoughts and be looking at what a few parliamentarians are going to do, but the reality is our assessment tomorrow will point out that what's happening in Parliament now isn't as important as everybody chomping on their coffees and cakes and watching what happens with a one-day perspective seems to make it. Any questions? If not, Bhargav, please flow on.
Thank you, Paul, for that. In South Asia, we primarily have a couple of protest and prohibitive orders imposed in southern India, but I will move to Nepal first, especially because the protests turned violent in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. And the protests were primarily against the MCC, Millennium Challenge Corporation funds being introduced in Nepal with a lot of funding from the US. This would be the biggest chunk of grants for what Nepal would actually get from the US, about $500 million, primarily to boost infrastructure across the country, focused towards electric grid as well as road construction. Of course, there is a democratic agenda behind this. The US wants to empower and fund democratic countries, especially in the third world. Now, the opposition to such a move is primarily rooted in the communist parties. And the ironic thing is the communist parties who are in power back in 2017 and 18 are actually opposing this when they are in the opposition. The ruling Nepali Congress, on the other hand, being center-right and sometimes center-left, they are in favor and they want to ratify this after the treaty was signed with the US. So the protests turning violent may actually catch fire across the country. So businesses need to look out, because this is both an opportunity as well as a risk, because if the communist parties do not really relent, and this will sound trouble to the ruling government. And if it does get passed, the infrastructure will get major boosts, helping businesses primarily in the construction and engineering sector. Moving on to India, there were a few prohibitory orders passed in some of the districts in the state of Karnataka, primarily due to an issue related to religious clothing being allowed or not allowed within the colleges. And the matter is in the High Court. Businesses need to watch out for pro-Hindu groups protesting in public, especially those which can disrupt supply chains. That's it from South Asia. So I will pass on the baton to Bassel to cover off on Middle East. We will touch upon Ukraine and Russia issue when we move on to Europe. Over to you, Bassel.
Thank you, Bhargav. So in the EMEA region today, we had 2 assessed events and 16 other developments. In the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia especially, customs authorities thwarted an attempt to smuggle 1.2 million amphetamine tablets into the country yesterday. So the General Directorate of Narcotics Control arrested 1 person in Riyadh and another one in Tabuk. The individuals possessed more than 1.2 million tablets ready to be smuggled throughout the country. Going over to Europe and for the 2 assessed events, 2 of them were in Europe. Starting off with France, union workers from the Régie Autonome des Transports Parisiens will go on strike in Paris tomorrow. It will be a 1-day strike that will affect buses, trams, and metro services. Also, rail and rapid transit services will also be affected. The strike was organized by labor unions that include the Labas, Solidaire, the General Federation of Labor, and the Workers' Force. As part of expected disruptions, clients should expect traffic congestion on major roads as more people will likely use alternative means of transportation like private vehicles or taxis. The other assessed event was in the UK. Storms keep the storms. 2 storms actually are visiting the UK. One hit the UK yesterday, which was Storm Dudley, and today tomorrow the UK will have storm Eunice. So thousands of people yesterday in England and Scotland got cut off from the power grid. All train lines from Carlisle to Edinburgh and Glasgow in Scotland were suspended due to the damages and impacts of the storm.
Thank you, Bassel, for that. There is a different kind of storm which seems to be subsiding in Eastern Europe as Russia seems to be drumming up their war drums. According to some sources, Putin is already planning to withdraw some of the troops from the borders with Ukraine as well as Eastern European neighbors. There are contradictory narratives being weaved around this. Some Western sources, they say there is no evidence to suggest that they're actually drawing down and they're withdrawing troops. While Putin has been very clear that they do not want war, there is no invasion planned. But what we cannot deny is saber rattling on both fronts. And in the entire shenanigan, there seems to be 2 critical winners. One is President Biden, who has been cheerleading Ukraine into taking a hard stance, and Putin. Obviously, this will boost his domestic image. Putin being a master strategist, we cannot deny that he has a broader game plan involved, especially with multiple pipelines going through Ukraine and one more competing pipeline coming up to the north of Baltic Sea, that is Nord Stream 2, which is stuck at the licensing level. Paul, any thoughts on the entire scenario on Ukraine and Russia? I would go ahead and say the saber rattling will stop at that level itself. I wouldn't really see a major escalation further because it's a lose-lose scenario.
Look, I think it's a no-brainer. I think it's quite amazing that the financial markets are all worried about it. It probably shows what happens when you have 20,000 people that are called analysts that aren't really analysing the 100 dumb sheep following the smart sheep, but nobody engages the smart sheep mean. So they all bump into the corner and cannot find the gate. I agree totally, Bhargav. I'm actually tired of talking about Ukraine. I think at some point Russia will come in now. I don't like the term saber rattling. I think it oversimplifies, as you mentioned. Putin's a master strategist and America's led by master emotionalists. So he's trying to work out who, if anyone, in Europe and NATO and America holds the power to combat him. And the reality is the leadership styles and the authority styles and the misuses of power particularly misuses of military power by America, is going to come back to haunt them. The real winner out of this is neither Russia, NATO, or America, neither Biden or Putin. The real winner out of this is China, because they're sitting back taking it all in and looking how ineffective NATO-America relationships are, how in the absence of Merkel, how murky the new leadership is in Germany, how ambiguous the relationship, despite written agreements, America and NATO sort of seem to be, is it Arthur or Martha in control? The West has got a lot of problems with societal discipline, countries that are polarised, poorly led. I don't even like to use the word led, just disgraceful management, no accountability on the leaders. It's all done by a day-by-day popularity basis for the next poll and the next public relations test. So I think the West is in for some very murky times ahead. And I think for all of those that herald Western greatness and downplay China, they probably need to put a little less time into being emotional and tunnel vision, a little bit more time into learning Mandarin. But let's close it out for today, Bhargav.
Certainly, Paul. Thank you for your thoughts, and I must agree with you that China is in a wait and watch mode, and they're grasping what all shenanigans both the players are doing in that part of the world. Sitati, I will pass the baton on to you to cover Africa for today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bhargav. In Africa today, we covered 3 developments. And out of these developments, yesterday's protests outside the United Nations support mission in Libya offices in Tripoli stood out. And protesters demanded the holding of elections and the dissolution of the House of Representatives. And they also called for the formation of a unified government, thereby rejecting the new government that is to be formed by the newly elected Prime Minister Fathi Bashagha. And just for context purposes, the outgoing Prime Minister, Abdul Hamid Al-Dibeiba, has refused to leave office. And this could likely lead to the formation of 2 parallel governments. The latest political developments in Libya set the stage for more protests and mobilization of armed groups. And of course, violent clashes in Libya could potentially occur. And this is expected to occur or take place in major cities such as Tripoli, Tobruk, Misrata, Sirte, Samha, and Ubari. Unless there's a comment, observation, or question regarding this, then I'll hand it back to Bhargav to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sitati. We'll close off the audio for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Please do reach out if you need more information about our unique membership services. Thank you.